This is actually being out there. So I'm just going to read two more pieces. Preposition dispersion. So this is set at Cheyenne Bottoms, which is in the Central Flyway. And I should just say briefly, so I came to sort of my interest in birds really late. Actually, I was a kind of quasi lower middle class, lived in a trailer in suburban Indiana and Indianapolis, and had no particular interest in the natural world. And then met someone who had that interest, and I was sort of required to go on hikes. And so that was many years ago, and we're no longer together, but I grant her that gift. That was a wonderful thing she gave me. And I found my interest drawn to things moving in the forest. This was back in Indiana. And I also had an office job at that time at Indiana University, which has an 11-acre woods in the middle of the campus. It's an amazing little forest. And one of my coworkers had grown up on a farm. He knew his birds. We start looking at these creatures, and I had this, one amazing experience of watching, with my friend Greg, a hawk. The tree is about as low as one of the tops of the bookcases over there. In the middle of the campus, this hawk eating a little rodent and blood dripping on the sidewalk as everybody's running to campus, running to class. I'm like, wow, that's really amazing. And so that's really where that began. And it really flourished in Kansas and continues to this day. So this is in the Central Flyway, Cheyenne Bottoms, which is a state of Kansas marshland. It's one of the most important wetlands in the Northern Hemisphere. And happy to say that Kansas Audubon was part of a successful fight to keep a corporate hog farm from locating next to it. So that was in part the inspiration for this poem. Preposition dispersion. Black of the back of the black-necked stilt, black of the fly, black of the scat the coyote left, sun-touched, wet to dry on wide white salt flats that are crisp clouds on the ground, whose white is the white of sandhill plums, the blossoms that lilt in the breeze that's lifting or pausing, the kestrel who holds a frog in its grip and rises in flight or perches to rest, light glides to the wound of its belly, the drip on dry grasses of water and blood, the flush of rust red the phalarope brings in circles on sloughs hidden in grass, gold stalks that rattle in wind clicks, then stop. A lifted leg, orange or yellow, the heron that hunts by patience and calm. Gold is the eye of the shoveler's sight, golden the name of the currents that bloom, a yellowish gold that is green will sim in the sky, deep night at the marsh, the cell a cluster of stars in the east. But first, there's the green of the bittern's deep call, and always the green of the leaves that untense. And blue. Blue is everywhere here in the damselfly's flight. Gray blue is the sound of the hooting grebe's call, a sound like the shades of silvered marsh water. Blue lightens the bills of ruddy ducks, flocked, and hides behind clouds that come from the north in the dusky, dusk sky. Blue deepens to colors my lover speaks of. A great star glitters purple in flecks with green and with red, Sirius low in season's descent. And now Arizona from the Literary Field Guide, another vulture poem. I became entranced with turkey vultures early on in Indiana when I first discovered birds. How many of you know the Boneyard in Tucson? At Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. So it's the great stretch of land by the Air Force Base where the Air Force and other aviation units of the military will put their spare aircraft, their surplus aircraft. And so this is set at the Boneyard. And I'll close with this poem. Our gills grew over. It was cryptic how it happened. So did theirs. Something can fly its whole life, then land forever. We had grown the right kind of thumbs, but that was just another accident. Other things ran up the trees with what became the wing. Molecules have no plan, but somehow effort works without trying. We perfect beams, precisely groove the interiors of alloy tubes. Altimeters become an emissary. Because the word miracle has nothing to teach us, we think it's somehow wiser than either the toggle or the beak. Machines preen, maps draw. We get so much wrong, but that's also beautiful. Over the boneyard, vultures drift like endings. Thank you.
Thank you for traversing the entirety of the U.S. with us, Chris. That was wonderful. Let's give one more round of applause to Chris Cokinos. If you need to stretch or yawn or cough, this would be a good time to do that because it makes me uncomfortable to think you're uncomfortable. So I just wanted to start with that. And also to play off of me being one of two people who raised my hand about Kansas. I was born in Kansas, raised in Missouri, moved to the desert when I was 14, and I finally felt like I was home. So I am truly a Sonoran desert girl, and I love the heat, and I love anything with needles, which may be very evident if you look at the number of tattoos I have on my body as well. I'm just going to start my reading now. There's a large installation piece in the Phoenix Art Museum entitled, "Do You Really Want to Hurt Me?" And essentially, it's an avocado tree, an entire avocado tree, reinforced with steel and decorated with hand-blown glass birds filled with Windex. Please tell me you've seen this, because I feel like this description sounds bad shit if you haven't seen it. Anyway, you can look it up online. This poem was inspired by that work of art. I was actually working with youth last year at the Phoenix Art Museum, and sort of my station for the youth poetry writing exercise was right by this tree. It's one of the giant installations on the first floor. It's called "Do You Really Want to Hurt Me?" Again. It's a beautiful, beautiful piece. And the poem that inspired is called "The Well of Sorrow is a Tree Filled with Glass Birds." Black, like a crooked trunk bending against secrets, brambled and twisted like arthritis of the heart. Blue like the knuckles and the wings, like the spirit smoke of the blue hour and the passing of bodies between flesh and starlight rippling beneath the stream. Like a diatribe against the forces of gravity, the moon and its infinite wailing. Wailing until someone records the language of movement, limb by limb like phonemes ripped from the roots of their words, bodies of thought mapping the space between bones that are moving like geologic time, performing for centuries until sense becomes beauty and the rational flies away like a murmuration of birds, blue-winged and glassy-eyed, full-bellied from juices, the arteries of your sorrow, wrenched like knots. So not too long ago, I thought it would be interesting to translate some of John Audubon's descriptions of North American birds into poetic commentary on romantic relationships. And yes, everyone thought that was strange, but I quickly became obsessed with Audubon's work, and that's how this little collection of poems entitled The Audubon Guide to Relationships was born. I will say that I also spent a lot of time with his watercolors, and some of the depictions of birds are very violent. Birds are sort of, ripping prey apart in their beaks, or they look like they're about to, sort of embark on some sort of altercation with one another. And I think some of that violence comes out in this poem, which is why I gave you that preface. This is called The Audubon Guide to Relationships, plate number 142, American Sparrowhawk. There is want, and there is not knowing what to want. The forested remains of a carcass still warm from the kill, the hand over the mouth, the sharpened switch across the back of your thigh. You are on your knees praying, yet not knowing what to pray for, having forgotten the vernacular of prayer. There are sparrowhawks clenching sparrows in their beaks, their necks broken and dangling like violence, their bodies upside down, held in a tree that contains seed pods and fern leaves, other hawks with bluer wings, wings that span the width of a branch and are only believable in paintings. The Audubon Guide to Relationships, plate number 238, Great Marbled Godwit, and no, I've never seen one of these. Apparently only John Audubon has. There is the larynx and the esophagus, the lips and the tongue, the penetration of my senses in the marshland, a misdirected romanticism on stilts. I wander the prairies through the summer, wanting the coarseness of sand and deep water probing, you watching me from the shore, me smelling of cinnamon and oysters, both of us pretending that there's something other than offspring between us as we lounge beneath an awning of grass, unstick ourselves from the sandbar of your muddy resolutions. Very characteristic of all my relationships as well. This poem's title and concept is loosely derived from a Whitman poem with a similar title. I already quoted a lot of Whitman earlier, so I will spare you. It's called To the Garden, the Desert. You are Sonoran desolation, cathecting the trail with the spirit weight of my body on your back. Two hawks colliding in mid-air, the sex of it bearing down on us, crushing the arteries of my heart like a kink in the snakeskin, the congealing of blood on the underbelly, amber diamonds in a field of sand. A python grows up to 30 feet during its lifetime, can live in a maze of tunnels behind the brick for months. Impalpable sustenance, curious breathing. The sun illuminates the saguaro like a victory. The currents of dry rivers colliding into orange mallow, hibiscus, sage. I caress them with my finger. I see your face. This poem opens with an epigraph by Leslie Marmon Silko. And I just realized while I was sitting here waiting to read that when Claudia took Wayne's artwork to the Audubon Society for its first auction, I was there in the audience, and the lecture that night was given by a hummingbird specialist, and I wrote all the notes for this poem on my phone. So it seems particularly apt for tonight's event. Again, it opens with an epigraph by Leslie Marmon Silko. As long as the hummingbird had not abandoned the land, somewhere there were still flowers, and they could all go on. It's entitled, We Will Never Inhabit the Earth for 40 million years, like the hummingbird has. We are not the streamlined genomes that we think we are. Instead, we are junk DNA, murderers of the Aztec gods who might have protected us. Our hippocampus is defunct, unable to memorize migratory flight paths across the Americas. We can't fly, let alone hover indefinitely. We have never burned calories at 10 times the rate of a mourning dove. We cannot consume half our weight in sugar. We are not the reincarnated spirits of anything, holy or otherwise. We are not warriors or women who died in childbirth, not even avian bodies shaped like seahorses, their nests made from moss and intuition, dried leaves and the fur of squirrels. Nothing depends on us for pollination, and we are not harbingers of the monsoon. We will never master the pigment of iridescence. We have done all the diversifying we can muster. And since none of my poems are uplifting, I'm going to end with one that is. 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 I'm going I know that I have mentioned Whitman a few times tonight, and that's because I've been an acolyte of Whitman for as long as I can remember. This year, we're celebrating the 200th